TikTok, it's time to rock. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 5150 show. This is a special episode for the channel. It's one that we have a lot of pleasure in presenting to you. It's one that we've been working and talking about for a while. So if you've been following our social media tags and links, you'll know who the person is. But it's important that we present him and introduce him because he's a key figure in the music and the guitars that we love talking about on this channel. Ladies and gentlemen, can you please put your hands together? Here he is. Bob.
Brilliant.
Oh, my Lord. It's good to see you, brother. Thank you for hanging out with us and, more importantly, taking the time, Bob, from your social time that you relax. It's in the evening in the UK where you are, Bob.
It is. It's about 9 p.m., 2100 hours in UK. Yeah.
Fantastic. And everybody, I'm here in New Zealand, so it's in the morning here. And it's not too bad when you're trying to work out links and times with folks in the UK because we're about 12, 13 hours difference. It's when you get someone that's in one of the 4 time zones in the United States, Bob, where it becomes a bit of a nightmare when I'm on Monday and they're on Friday still, It's just...
Or somebody on Tuvalu.
Yeah.
It's going to be a whole day away.
But it's a pleasure to have you on the channel. I've had a lot of social media messages since we broke the story. And I say that, ladies and gentlemen, that Bob was coming on the channel from a lot of people saying that they were certainly looking forward to either joining us live, Bob, or certainly they'll be watching the replay. So if you're watching us live, at some stage I'll do a bit of a shout out to you. But if you're watching a replay, thank you for those messages. If you guys have any questions for Bob during the show, please put them into the comments and I'll do the best that I can to present them to him. And if you have any other questions, if you're watching the replay, put them in the comments and Bob may come back and answer them, or find Bob and I'll attach all Bob's social media links on this show too for you to go and follow Bob. And while we're talking about social media links and following Bob, I think it's really, really important, ladies and gentlemen, for us to acknowledge the fact that I met Bob through social media on the guitar show with Ramon and you, Bob. Gosh, at least a couple of years ago, Bob.
Yeah. I'm not sure how long I've known Ramon. Probably must be 5-6 years now.
Yeah, that would be right.
He saw me talking about guitars and stuff somewhere. Obviously, I mean, the fact that I can be a really boring asshole, but I've got interesting guitars. They speak for me. So, it's easy to make friends. But he kind of came after me and he suggested that we did that. We tried doing some videos originally on the Guitar Show, which is his channel,
sure,
which is pretty well subscribed. I haven't looked recently, but I guess it must have about 40,000 subscribers.
Yes,
something in that ballpark. And so we do separately, but sort of in parallel with that, we do this Bob and Ramon show thing,
yes,
where we kind of knock about on matters mainly to do with guitars and music, but occasionally we're both quite politically, not active isn't the right word, but opinionated. And so sometimes we get into politics, which invariably gets us into trouble.
Oh my Lord, I love politics too, and I love it. And there's 2 rules here, and it's true. We don't talk politics on this show, and we don't talk religion. Because
Good.
I love current affairs, but maybe you should invite me on your channel when you guys start talking political, and we'll have a political conversation over there, Bob.
Maybe we should. We have done a few 3-ways. It can get quite unruly, but we've done a few 3-ways, and they can get quite fun. Yeah.
So getting back to Ramon brother, if you're watching this live, please drop a link in the chat, or if you are going to be catching up with this show on replay, say hi. I want to take a special moment and thank Ramon. I mentioned it to Bob in the green room, ladies and gentlemen, when our channel had 400 subscribers and Peter Green had passed away. And we were talking about the Beano album and Eric Clapton, and Ramon had done a couple of videos on his channel about that. I asked Ramon if he'd want to come on, and Ramon was so nice. He said, absolutely, bro. You just give me the date, give me the time, and we'll jump on. And he could have easily said, nah, sorry, mate, I'm too busy for you guys. So thank you, Ramon, for doing that and giving us at least the opportunity to link up with Bob, who's here now a couple of years later with us. So, Ramon and Bob, how's that channel going? You haven't done much lately on there, Bob.
Well, actually, we're our own worst enemy because we've both been a bit busy. We're both a little bit lazy. So we've really decreased the frequency of our posts. We've only done a couple of videos in the last 2 or 3 months, so it's really we're not refreshing the content as often as we should be. There is a plan to do another show next week.
Great.
And there's quite a lot to do because there's a few new guitars. I've got a couple of new amps. Ramon's got a couple of new gigs coming up. So there's quite a lot of stuff to spring off before we go off in our peculiar direction.
Okay, that's fantastic. And what I'll do too, ladies and gentlemen, is I will attach your channel, Bob, on our channels page.
Okay.
And what we do is we invite every show that we do, Bob, we invite everybody that watches to go and subscribe to all our friends. So all our friends are on our channels page.
Yeah.
So we'll attach your channel there. And I don't think we've even attached Ramon's channel on there. So we'll attach Ramon's channel. And we like to say this all the time. A subscription is really easy on social media. All you do, it's easy. It doesn't cost you a thing. You just hit the subscribe, but it helps the channel. It helps that channel immensely.
Yeah. Helps you monetize it, doesn't it?
Well, that's right, and that's the key. Once you get to 1,000 subscribers, the door's open. It's one of the interesting things, Bob, about YouTube. It's really difficult to get to 1,000.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that I know how YouTube works, but I do know from being a part of this channel, once you get to 1,000, you start to go up in the algorithms, and they start to put your videos into other things, and so that's easier. That sort of pushes your profile a little bit, Bob.
The regulators and the tech guys have a word for this. It's called a network effect.
Ah.
They actually have a word for it, and it's really, really hard to get to the first 10, the first 50, the first 100, the first 1,000. They're all excruciating, and then suddenly the stone begins to gather moss and momentum, and away you go.
Wow. Okay. All right. So we've learnt something.
Well,
okay. Thank you.
That's a segue. I mean, I guess we should start about who is this guy who's on your channel, because I need to make a few kind of disclaimers almost. I mean, so I'm a retired ad man.
Okay.
I'm not a professional musician, or actually, to tell the truth, these days I am a professional musician, because apart from my pension, the only thing that I earn any money from is teching, playing, recording, sessioning, consulting, advising, and opining. So I am now a professional in this space, but I never have been across my life. I've just been very active player and very involved.
I get it.
So there you go. So, for people who might be asking, where did I get the money to buy the instruments that I have, which are pretty great? And the answer is they were all bought out of my income as an advertising person.
Sure.
And I was careful about that, because at the same time, I've got a family. I was raising a family, buying a home. So obviously you can't just go out and spunk off on, billions of Blackguard Telecasters and then live in a shed. So I had to be pretty careful about it. But I think also I did most of my buying. Well, God knows it was expensive enough, but it wasn't like the craziness of nowadays.
Well, that's one of the things, isn't it, Bob? That's always interesting. You always hear about how, Stratocasters, the famous thing, where Clapton's in the States and Stratocasters just lying in the back of the record store, of the music store, and he brings 4 back to the UK, and they couldn't give them away, Bob.
Yeah.
In my lifetime, a Stratocaster has never been a giveaway item.
Yeah. Well, so I should explain as well. I'm sitting in front of a virtual background here, which is a photograph that I took about 10 years ago of my better guitars for Vintage Guitar magazine. Okay.
Yes.
So this is the old photograph, and somewhere here, where is it? There's a Stratocaster somewhere. I think it's right behind me. There's a gold Strat, and
Sure.
that guitar cost me 180 British pounds in 1975.
Wow.
And it was dirty, it was beat up, but and that is a 1961 Shoreline Gold Stratocaster.
Wow.
So now it's worth an unfeasible amount of money, partly because it's a great slabboard 61 with a really big neck, but mainly because it's a custom color, and the custom color is rare. So that, and the same night that I went to this guy's house to buy that guitar, he also had a 1960 Les Paul Sunburst. So, tomato soup, thin neck. He wanted 300 UK pounds for it.
Wow.
And, at the time, the 180 I was dropping on this Stratocaster was going to clear me out for 2 months.
Sure.
So I couldn't even have thought about it. With hindsight, I'm really glad I didn't. I mean, apart from the fact I would have made an enormous amount of money, but apart from that, I'm really glad I didn't, because it meant that I was still begging for one of those guitars for a good 20, 30 years more before I finally got to one.
Yeah. Okay, so I get what you're saying. So when we look back from today's perspective and look at some of the prices of these guitars, and think, oh my gosh, look how cheap they were. Actually, during that actual time, in the 70s or the 80s, when you consider all things being equal, they were certainly, not an affordable guitar during their time too. So I get that. Thank you.
Yeah, they've always been a price that would make a musician think. It's just that they've now got to a stage where they're a price where they don't make the musician think, they just make the musician realize, for most of them, it's just the ship has sailed. If you're talking, guitars going for what's the current rate for a really good early Telecaster? Probably you won't get one for less than 40,000 UK if it's good.
Wow.
Early Strats in custom colors, you're probably talking about the same money. Les Pauls, you can see it, online, you see the money that Les Pauls are going for now. You're talking 6 figures easily, So that means that they're no longer unaffordable. They're just impossible. But having said that, this is a market, that they're only able to fetch these sums of money because there are people out there prepared to put those sums of money into them.
Oh, look, I get it, and this is a commercial world that we're in.
Yeah.
I get that, Bob. And when you've got a guy like Kurt Hammett paying $2 million for Peter Green's guitar, and then a couple of months ago, doing a venture with Gibson and coming out with, a Murphy Labs copy, and what were they, 50,000 US dollars? It's wow.
Yeah. I mean, while we're on that, that 50,000, and you had to put your name on a list. You had to subscribe. You didn't just walk in with your $50,000 and say, "Hello, my good man, I'd like one of those nice instruments on the wall, please." You didn't do that. So even that, and just in the last week or so, Gibson have announced this very, very strange thing where it looked like they were actually getting into the vintage guitar market and selling vintage guitars themselves. And to this day, I'm still not sure if they're actually now selling real vintage guitars, but selling them as Gibson, with some kind of authentication, or whether these things are actually yet more bloody replicas. So imagine you're a car manufacturer and you spend your entire time making 1950s sedans instead of modern electric hybrids.
Good point.
It's really weird. And even worse, if you are a collector and you look at all these reissues and these copies, they've all got something wrong. One of the famous ones is the current twin pickup Epiphone Casino reissue. Fully authenticated as a collector's choice, historic, so it's an expensive guitar, certification, all the rest of it. You look at the parallelogram markers on the neck, they're the wrong way round. It's just, if you're going to charge a shitload of money, pay attention.
How would a mistake like that get through Gibson's process? I find that bizarre, Bob.
Yeah, I just don't know. It beggars belief. But even in the years before, you'd get things like they'd reissue a double cut special and a Les Paul special, Les Paul Junior. So slab body double cut, but they would insist on having a Tune-o-matic bridge and a stop tailpiece. Now, they might say, look, the technology has moved on as it did across the 1950s, and this is an improvement.
Sure.
And that would be fine. Well, then don't sell it as a reissue. Sell it as an improved, whatever.
Sure.
But don't sell it as a reissue. Don't sell it as a vintage, So they made all these kind of mistakes forever, and they seem determined to continue. Whereas if they talked to any expert, and God knows there are many people in the world who are far more expert than me on this, who can opine about the detailed components of Gibsons and Fenders until you're blue in the face. And you'd only need to talk to one of them, and they would say, great effort, guys. There are 7 things wrong with that. Change them, and you've got a credible product. It's really quite amazing.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And one of the great things that we love doing as guitar players and guitar nuts is talking about the companies that produce these great, wonderful instruments. I just saw a video yesterday when I was wasting a bit of time on YouTube. A guy was talking about how you can go and buy jerseys and hats and beanies and caps from Gibson's website now. And a lot of people were making fun about that, about what's going on with Gibson. Look, I get the fact, Bob, that it's a brand. I get that it's a lifestyle brand. I get that. I get what the Gibson mystique is about. But I suppose they have to be prepared for people wanting to contradict where they want to take the company to. That's part of the process of being in the commercial market, Bob.
Absolutely, and delivering increasing revenues and values to their owners and their shareholders. I mean, right now Gibson is private equity owned, and having the focus of private equity is probably really good for the business. But private equity is a very demanding mistress too. So those guys, the management of Gibson will be under the cosh.
Oh yeah, I've worked for companies in the past that were owned by shareholders, and there's one thing that they want at the end of the day.
Yeah. They don't really care if you make toast or guitars. They want your money. They want money.
Yeah. They're not interested in my health, welfare, and lifestyle choices, Bob. Look, we get it. One of the things that I really loved about you, Bob, when I went and saw you on your social media posts, was the fact that you were quite happy to offer your opinion and your experience and your expertise that you'd picked up along the years of being a guitar nut. Yeah. The advice that you were giving people, that you would give people, the detail that you went through talking about Les Pauls, being able to actually identify what year, because you can grab a pin and you can put it into the plastic and you can tell by the smell of the plastic what Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
You know that blew me away, Bob, because I didn't know anything about that, and also the practical advice that you would give people, like when you would take your guitars, and there's a lot of videos of you with your guitars at guitar shows, and how you've got a beady eye and you're keeping an eye on what's going on, but you
yeah,
also unscrew the plastic knob off the pickup selector because people love pinching the,
yeah.
just these little bits of information, Bob.
Well, so if you're lucky enough to kind of own things like this, you've basically got two routes you can take. You can
Sure.
either go, these are all mine, and you can't even look at them, you can't touch them. That's fine. If you want to be like that, that's fine. If it's a private pleasure. For me, sharing my good fortune and the knowledge that I pick up along the way is a real part of it for me, and I've made many friends out of it. And
Brilliant.
so it's just a personal choice. I obviously, with some valuable assets, I'm a little bit careful
Yeah.
about them. I don't make a song and dance about where I keep them stored.
Yeah.
I have somewhere secure and off-site, which is enough of a diversion to deter most people.
Sure.
But when people come around here, there's no, am I going to let them touch things? It's like you're here to have fun with these things. I know that you're not going to, swing them around like an axe and try and smash things up with them. So just get on with enjoying them, And when it comes to those stories, I mean, partly you pick up those stories when you deal with people, because there are some fantastically knowledgeable people in this
Okay.
space who've been dealing instruments, for 50 years, and they've seen it all. They saw it all before the layers of bullshit got layered on top as the money got big. So but the other thing is you also learn from experience. So, for example, when I bought the Les Paul, one thing that it came with was a crack in the plastic switch tip, which meant that I knew that one day it was going to go.
Sure.
It took 10 years to go, but one day I was playing at home. I wasn't under combat conditions and thrashing on stage, but I just flicked the switch the wrong way and ping, it went. So I had to go into the market for a genuine replacement switch tip. And that's when you realize that you've got a complete idiot on this show tonight, because this is the man who's paid $450 for a piece of plastic the size of his thumbnail, right? Because I had to. And nowadays guys are paying, there are rumors that people are paying up to $20,000 for pickup rings.
Wow.
Which is just, that's a piece of plastic. It's like, wow. But then again, if you've got one of these damn things and
Sure.
your pickup ring really is in a mess, what are you going to do? You can put a replica on. There are some very good replicas. In fact, on my Les Paul, I have a replica on it all the time, and the real replacement switch tip just sits in the case. The replica costs £12.
Okay, I get it.
And it looks great. But you're right. When I go to guitar shows, I do always take the switch tips off, because they're so easy to disappear, and they're so valuable. Another little trick. This is not an anti-theft trick. It's just I try, whenever I take a guitar off and put it down, I try and turn the knobs to 0. The reason for that is if you leave the knobs up at 10 or 8, where you use them most of the time, the tracks of the potentiometers, the wiper blade on the track tends to sit there, and it pits the track, which is a piece of carbon that's maybe 50 or 60 years old, and it pits it, and gradually what you do is you kind of crystallize a crackle onto your volume pot. So if you wind all your controls back to 0 every time you put the guitar away, then if that's going to happen, it's going to happen down at the bottom end, where you're very seldom going to use. You don't use a volume control on a guitar down at 0. You start about 3 and you go up through 8 to 10. So that's a little trick that I learned. Nobody told me that one. I learned it by myself. I'm not tremendously religious about doing it, which means some of my old gear crackles a bit. But things like that, you can, by looking after these things, you can make them play better, work better, sound better, and last longer.
Wow. And a good friend of ours is saying good advice about the pots. So fantastic. Look, let's talk about your Les Paul while we're talking about guitars. So
Sure.
obviously, during the course of your music career, Bob, you've played various Les Pauls, and then you got to a stage where you wanted to have, one of these classic, sought-after Les Pauls. Tell us about that journey. I do remember you, and I'm going to cheat a little bit here. I do remember watching a show when you said, when you listen to these free albums, when you're listening to these albums from this period, and you hear the Les Paul, there is something about these 58s, these 59s, these 60 Les Pauls that are very special, and you can hear that clearly when you're playing something. So can you just tell us about that journey, that process? Because I think that's going to be fascinating. Please.
Okay, so it's a long. I'm quite old, so it's quite a long story. So I'll compress it like crazy. So I was born in 55. So in 67, I was 12 years old. I lived in the centre of London, and so I was, albeit too young to really understand much about what was going on, I was part of the whole crazy London scene. London was the most extraordinary place in those days. Creativity literally rose out of the paving stones.
Wow.
It was amazing. The Apple store, the Beatles Apple store, was a 3-minute walk down the road from my home. The clothes that people wore were just incredible. From a post-war, you left school and became your father, and then suddenly there was this whole thing about teenage, and the teenagers grew up, and all this creativity, the art, the music was exploding. Everything was fantastic, right? And one of the most relevant manifestations to what we're doing here on this show is a bunch of mainly middle-class white youngsters took a form of American music that was really languishing, and they reinvented it, repackaged it with a good smattering of pop, and that became the British blues boom, right? Blues it wasn't dead in the water in the States, but it was tending towards a very serious minority pursuit.
Correct.
And these middle-class white boys, not many of them, picked it up and took it somewhere else. So you're obviously talking about Keith Richard, who had the first well-known Les Paul in the UK, the Sunburst with the Bigsby. But then you're talking about Jeff Beck, you're talking about Eric Clapton, you're talking about Jimmy Page. A little later, you're talking about Paul Kossoff. By this time, lots of the prog guys got involved. I'm always, when people ask me about my favorite guitar players, I always mention this guy called Gary Green, who was in Gentle Giant.
Wow.
And Gentle Giant, well, they're an acquired taste. I mean, some of their albums are a bit difficult. But what a blues player. And he played a Les Paul, the Sunburst. So, even the second and third tiers of these guys were playing this guitar. So it's because these guys were my heroes that this guitar piqued my interest. About the same time, I lobbied my father like crazy. When I was about 16, he finally bought my first Gibson.
Wow.
And actually, looking behind you tonight, there's a prompt there, because to your left, you've got your SG standard there. My SG was history hasn't been kind to it. In 1972, Gibson and Norlin were producing weird guitars. It was an SG Deluxe, which was basically the SG standard of the era. Okay. It had a very thin neck, horrible. It had a paddle headstock. It had embossed pickups, which some people love. I think they look like shit. And I found my pickup covers about 2 years ago. I put them on eBay and I made a packet.
Wow.
And honestly, if eBay hadn't existed, I would have thrown them away. I hate them so much. But anyway, it was not a very nice guitar. Also, the controls were mounted on a semicircular plate on the front of the guitar. The body chamfering was wrong for an SG. It was a real piece of crap. But it was my first Gibson. It didn't sound, however, like all these old albums. So I'd got my first Gibson and I was so excited. But from about day 3, it was like, oh, God. Okay, well, we're on a journey here. We haven't arrived yet. Anyway, I then have to disclose something. The Les Paul that I have, right, my 58 Les Paul, this thing. My Lord. Okay, that thing. I can pick it up again in a second. It's Les Pauls are quite heavy. Right, this is the only Les Paul I've ever owned. Not many people know that. They think that I would have bought a ton of shitty 1974 Norlins and then maybe got a decent, 82 with a decent neck profile and some humbuckers, and then saved like crazy, and eventually made enough money to go into the big time. No, this is the only Les Paul I've ever owned.
I'm amazed.
Because I played lots of Les Pauls, through the late 70s, early 80s. I didn't like them. So I was buying, modern boutique guitars. I bought about a PRS, one of the first 5 PRSs that came into the UK is still with me.
Okay.
Don't play it much, don't really like it, would quite like to sell it. But, anyway, things like that, like Tom Anderson's, like Brian Moore's, guitars like that, boutique-y, that's what I was playing.
Okay.
Because I really wasn't very impressed with these Gibsons. I was more impressed with the Fenders of that era.
Okay.
And I was really impressed with the Tokais of that era.
Okay.
But the Les Pauls, so I was thinking, look, I'm going to have to get the guitar that makes the sound that is important to me.
Yes.
But all these modern replicas, they're as much use as a paintbrush.
Wow.
So eventually, basically, just compacting the story. So we had our son just before 2000, the late 90s. And once I got used to the idea of, owning and buying a home and having a child and educating and, paying for them, all the rest of it, I realized I had a little bit of money left. And so that was when I went for the Les Paul. So I was 42 years old before I got one.
Wow.
And, I thought at the time, I actually went into the market for a 57, 58 gold top with Pat humbuckers. That's what I was looking for.
Okay.
And they're even rarer than Sunbursts. So you just don't find many. But I played a couple and they weren't very good. Gary Moore was selling one. He was selling one of the early ones with the black plastic parts. But in those days, I used to play 9-gauge strings, 9 to 42s. Gary's gold top was strung with 11 to 58s. And this was like a piece of agricultural equipment. I mean, my pathetic little hands couldn't play this thing. It was just an impossible guitar. So even though it was very famous and they wanted lots of money for it, and I'm sure it was really good, it wasn't for me. And then shortly afterwards, one of the dealers I was talking to brought Sunburst round on a Sunday afternoon to my place. And I opened the case and said, no, we're not going there. That's big money. We can't do that. There's big, big money. He said, look at it. This is probably the last of these guitars you'll see at this price. Try it, see what you think. He was right. It was a great guitar. I bought it. I had half the money for it, and I put the other half on my house mortgage to get the money. So that's how I bought it. I thought at the time I was buying a pretty ordinary Les Paul. I liked it, but I thought it was pretty ordinary as bursts go. Now I've seen and played a lot of bursts. I did a lot better than that.
Wow.
My burst hasn't got a lot of action going on in the wood. So it's not the kind of guitar that what I call the furniture collectors in America buy, the real crazy flame stripes. It's not like that. It's like the kind that Mark Knopfler likes. It's called a plain burst. It's got more action on the longitudinal medullary stripes than it has on the cross maple figuring. It's a 58, so the neck is big.
Wow.
And what owning all these guitars has taught me is that a lot of the tone of a guitar is in the neck. A lot of the tone.
I'm glad you mentioned that, and I don't want to interrupt, but you did a video where you spoke about that and how these 58s sound awfully like Telecasters, and we did a show after you mentioned that, myself and the rock professor Simon Williams. I'm going to do a shout out to one of my co-hosts, and we spoke about your theory about how. So anyway, I'm sorry for interrupting, but maybe you might want to incorporate that into your story, because I thought it was a fascinating insight.
So I've got this 58. It's a plain burst, and in the hierarchy of Les Pauls, the first thing is if you've got a 58 guitar, it's got a big C-shaped neck, and you can actually tell what the neck profile is if you look at the heel, because the profile continues around onto the heel. So if it's a sort of C shape, you got a 58. If it's a flatter D shape, it's a 59. And if it's a really flat D shape, it's the skinny 60. The color is great on 58s and 59s because they fade beautifully. On 60s, the tomato soup persists because they made a more stable red dye.
Sure.
But back to the neck. The neck on a 58 is thick. It's a big neck. And I'm convinced that a lot of the instrument's tone lives in there. And when I started playing early 50s Telecasters, I became not so much convinced as almost religious about this.
Wow.
Because the sound of a 51 Blackguard, right? When you pick these things up, the neck feels like it's made of stone, not wood. The neck has aged in such a way, there's something about it, you pick it up and you just think, it really feels like stone. And the tone of those guitars as well is extraordinary. The thing about a Telecaster is known for being a sharp cutting guitar. It's got a lot of, an old one has got a lot of richness in its tone. A Les Paul is known for being a dark guitar. These old Les Pauls are not dark guitars.
Wow.
Right? All the modern Les Pauls, there's two things wrong with them for me. One, they're dark. So it's basically like me talking to you through a sock. It's not the way I play, and I'm not interested in that kind of guitar. The second thing is even the really great replicas still feel to me, as an experienced user of a real one, they feel like they're covered in a very thin layer of cling film. They're sticky. Now, I might be insulting thousands of people who are watching this presently and subsequently who have modern Les Pauls that they love. They've got R8s and collector's choices and historic balonies and all the rest of it. Fine. Whatever rings your bell. But for me, and yes, I am being a bloody snob here, they feel like they're covered in cling film. They feel a bit like, you know, the Telecasters from the 70s, which are covered in that polyester goop that's about 4 feet thick. You know, first thing you do with your Telecaster, get the goop off and you'll find the guitar is infinitely better immediately. So, you know.
Look, I'm just going to jump in and agree with you. See, this Les Paul is a 2019 Bob.
Right.
Took me 40 years to get one. I've changed the pickups with Monty's guitars, Bethnal Green pickups.
Oh, you got the Bethnal Greens in, right? Yes,
I've got the 50s loom in there, and I just got it back from my luthier. He's had it for a month. He's shaved the neck. The neck was too thick, and it felt exactly like Bob was saying. And so later I'll show you. It took me 3 months to come to the decision that I had to do that, because it's not something that you're going to do on the. But I made sure, Bob, that whatever I was going to do to that guitar was for me.
Yeah.
You know, I wasn't looking at any kind of value. So I've shaved the. You know, well, the neck has been shaved.
Yeah.
It's. My God, it's a different guitar, Bob.
Yeah. Well, also with that wiring loom and those pickups, you'll be getting some more of your treble back. It won't be so dark and so muted.
Yeah.
So if anybody wants to spend their entire time making woman tone noises, then buy one of these ordinary modern Les Pauls. That's fine. But I like my guitars with the tone most of the way up most of the time.
Wow.
You know, so. But it is absolutely true. And the Les Paul and the Telecaster, which are probably the most iconic two instruments. And it's so interesting. Their starting point is bright and dark. And when you play them next to each other, they coalesce very fast. There's an amazing video I just watched today. There's a 51 Blackguard Telecaster on sale in the UK at the moment for a lot of money. And that fantastic young guitar player, Chris Buck. Is it Chris Drury?
Chris Drury?
Chris Buck. He's playing on this old Telecaster, and it sounds unbelievable. Unbelievable. And the other thing about these instruments is you can go from clean to overdriven with your fingers.
Wow. Not
with pedals and volume controls and knobs and just... So in other words, you can play and you can express yourself. And he's doing that on this video. He does it beautifully.
I just want to share with you, Bob, and folks watching the show. So when Bob explained that on a video. And I'll promise what I'll do over the next couple of days, I'll go and find these videos that we're making reference to, and I'll attach them to this description so that you can go back and see the videos that we're referencing on the show and make it a hell of a lot easier for you.
Right.
So we did a show here on the channel, and we spoke about that. I went and did a little bit of research, Bob, and I found out that a lot of country players were playing Les Pauls. In fact, the guitar player in Waylon Jennings' band was playing a Les Paul. So you know, in conjunction with Waylon's Telecaster. So the penny dropped when I saw this, when I read, okay. So, you know, country guys were playing it long before the rockers were taking them over.
Yeah, that's right. And also the country guys, Nashville guys, they love Les Paul Juniors, particularly single cuts, because they're a slightly fatter Telecaster. And you go, hey, hang on, how does that work? But you know, I for my 60th birthday, I bought a guitar that I didn't have, which was a single cut Les Paul from '55, from my birth year, and that guitar is amazing for country. But the other thing the country guys are doing, I've only just discovered this, is I've just picked up. I actually inherited it from a dear friend of mine who died recently. He was a great guitarist. His name was Alan Darby, and he was a pretty famous guitar player.
Sure.
He's a dear friend of mine, and for the last 10 years, he's been my mentor. So every time I pick a guitar up now, I don't need to remember him because he's in my playing every day.
Okay.
But he left me a copy of a Trainwreck amplifier that another mutual friend of ours had made. And Trainwrecks are rather similar to what we're talking about with Telecasters and Les Pauls. A Trainwreck, if you set it up right, your volume control on the guitar will take you from an acoustic sound through to a clean electric sound, through into a Beano sound, right up into the Soldano sound.
Wow.
On your volume control. And you read this stuff in the magazines, or you see it on shows like this, and you go, yeah, yada, 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 yada.
Yeah,
it bloody works. It works.
Wow.
So the other day, I've only had this amplifier 2 or 3 weeks. The other day, I put my Les Paul Junior through this Trainwreck, and it was like the guitar and the amplifier were having sex with each other. I was just holding it, right? They were it was unbelievable. An incredible feeling. The amplifier was just sucking sound out of this guitar. And I don't just mean creamy blues-driven overdrive. I mean right on the edge, everything, even the clean down on volume 3. It was unbelievable. I thought, what am I holding here? Now, clearly, I have to be able to work a guitar well enough to be able to get these sounds out of it. I'm not a bad guitarist, but I hang around with guitar players who are way better than me every day of the week. They're everywhere. I'm not a great guitarist, but Jesus, I'm sitting down kind of, look, I've only got an hour before I've got to go out and do something. I want to play this all night. It was just so good. So of course, now when I go back, every guitar I plug into this thing, I kind of go, okay, does it do it too? So I had my 1960 double cut Junior, that one there. Ooh, hang on, go backwards. Yeah, oh no, that's a special. That's the Junior there. I had that through it this afternoon. Same thing. Amazing. And I'm constantly looking for trying to be able to literally go out with a guitar, a cable, a strap, an amplifier, and just play. And I'm getting damn near it.
So what is it about this amp then? You've told us obviously these guitars are an important component to the, but tell us about this amp, because
well the first thing is I should say that the old debate, you've got a fixed amount of money. Let's say you've got, I don't know, $2,500 to spend on a setup. Okay, what are you going to spend most of the money on, the guitar or the amp?
Well, they've always said the amp.
It is the amp. It is undoubtedly the amp. If you you get a good guy to set up a 200-pound guitar, maybe drop a nice pickup in it or something like that, make it a 300-pound guitar. You've got nearly £2,000 left to spend on a really decent amplifier. If you put a £2,500 guitar through a nasty amplifier, it'll sound like a nasty guitar. So but it took me 50 years to learn that. Because guitars are the sexy bits. They're nice colors. They're tactile, whereas an amp's a black bloody box. But it's clearly it is the amplifier first. Get the amplifier right. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I should say, these are only clones, copies of Trainwrecks. I don't have the access or the budget to buy a real Trainwreck, $40,000, a real Dumble, $100,000+.
Wow.
Right? So I've got clones. I have played a Dumble. I've never played a Trainwreck. So I don't even know if they're any good. I do know that they ring my bell. That's all I can say.
Fascinating. So this idea, and we talk about it again, Bob, often on the channel when we're ranking tracks, we get photos of the period of the artist or the band that we're talking about, and we always love looking at the photos, Bob, where the guitar player, you know, Jimmy Page, for example, the most that you probably see him with in the early 70s is going through a wah, and the cable is going straight into the amp. So this idea of just picking up a guitar, Bob, a cable, and an amp, this wonderful idea of just being able to grab those three things, you've nailed it.
Well, and the other thing is, I mean, going back to country, if you look at the country players, the great country players, you know, they're all playing old Telecasters. Yeah. They're probably playing through something like an old narrow panel Fender Deluxe, something like that. They're probably not using any pedals at all. They're just using a cable, right? And the things that they're doing in terms of tone and sound, because they are just incredible guitar players, but there's a world of sound there. You know, I'm not saying that a really great big pedal board, you know, with all kinds of fantastic noises isn't a brilliant bit of fun and can be a creative exercise in itself. I'm not dismissing it, but I guess for the kind of guitar I like to listen to most and the kind of guitar I want to play most, I really want to go back to, it's a bit like Italian cooking. Very few, very fantastic ingredients and not much fuss. You know?
Okay, I've got a question for you. So obviously on this channel, we've been very, very lucky to be associated with, being in close relationships with some great books. You know, this one here in particular by Bob, and Bob is in the chat. Good to see you, Bob. Thank you for joining us, and thank you again for this wonderful book that you've put together for us. That we're still celebrating, and we'll do everything that we can to make sure that Fleetwood Mac and British Electric Blues Nuts gets their hands on. But Bob, so getting back to you and the experience that you've picked up over the years, and I've read your articles. You've written articles on. I've read your articles. You're a great writer.
Thank you.
The way that you write is exactly the way that you talk from your videos. Have you thought about sharing your experiences and your journey with us in book form? Is that something that you would consider doing? Because I'm sure you'd have a lot of information and a lot of entertaining stories that people would be captivated by.
Right. Thank you. That's a really great question. I'd be lying if I said I hadn't, but I haven't thought about it very hard because I am quite lazy. And writing a book, I mean, I do also write. I write, as you say, you've kindly said you've read some of my writings about guitars. I also still write quite a lot about the advertising industry. So I do write regularly, but these tend to be kind of, 1,000, 1,500 word pieces. Whereas a book is probably, I don't know, 50, 60, 70,000 words, something like that.
Sure.
It's quite a big deal. And I kind of look at it and I go, God, that's I could probably do that, but it's a hell of a mountain to climb. The other thing is it's lovely to be on this show, but I mean, on the one hand, I'm coming across as, you know, probably a wealthy-ish guy with some nice gear under his belt, bit opinionated, but also I try and remain a bit humble too. And I'm not convinced that, you know, the entire world wants necessarily to go out and buy, you know, a hardback book of my thoughts, as it were. I don't know, but it would be fun. And you know, the more I do this, the more I realize that you're kind of right. I've got a bit to say.
Yeah, and look, I think this is the interesting thing that I have discovered myself being part of this channel, Bob. It's this organic thing that people like. And one of the great things about social media now is that, here's a guy in Hamilton, New Zealand talking to a guy in the UK that we would never have met. We would never have met 20 or 30 years ago.
Absolutely.
In the green room, we were talking about how we used to get information back in the day. It was through books, it was through someone at the music store or the record store, and we can talk about those stories. Now you can jump online and be entertained and get information from anybody on anything.
Yeah.
But one thing, though, that I like about social media, and I'm going to be respectful when I say this, is that you can find a lot of organic, real people talking about the subjects that you like. And there's a lot of deep fakes out there as well, too, chasing whatever deep fakes chase.
Yeah.
And Bob, you're not a deep fake. Ramon's not a deep fake. It comes across clearly on the videos. So this organic thing that people are going to see on social media and go, yeah, but this is Bob. Okay, I get it. So let's see what he's got to say in depth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. The other thing, the other thing about social media, I think. The first thing is a lot of people get very put off by the amount of snarky people and the amount of trolling going on.
Oh yeah.
And for me, I just behaved a bit thick-skinned. I just go, I'm not going to take any notice of that. Right? So that person's got issues. They're not my issues. I'm going to ignore it. So I can exclude all that. The rest of the people have got something interesting to say, and there's a lot of knowledge out there too. Real great lot of knowledge. And as you rightly say, the internet and social media, what a wonderful way of sharing that. Yes, you've got to be a little careful with your filters.
Sure.
But, if you see somebody say something that's interesting and different, I don't know, about a particular minute thing about a guitar or something, you look at it and go, well, I'm not sure that's right, but that's a really interesting point of view. I wonder if over time I can triangulate to corroborating that.
Sure.
And lo and behold, somebody else pipes up and said, yeah, that's my experience too. And then somebody else might say, I used to work for Mullard when they made those valves, and polluted the rivers of Hertfordshire back in the day or whatever. And suddenly a story's developing and you go, okay, this is beginning to ring true. It's really exciting.
Yeah. I agree. And there's somebody, I'm sorry, YouTube won't tell me your name. It just says Facebook user. So if you're watching from Facebook, thank you. But somebody from Facebook said that they would buy Bob's book. So yeah. So
I may have a new career. Brilliant.
Thank you for giving some enthusiastic support to Bob.
Yeah, thank you.
Because he just said at the beginning of the show, he's in retirement. He's a full-time musician now, so even can become a full-time writer. Yeah. Bob, I suppose one of the interesting things though about what we do here as music fans is, we love the stories that people have, and you told us a little bit about your story.
Yeah.
And I just want to get back to, again, offering some support on what you've done on your channel and with Ramon on his channel too. There's a few videos there where you talk about your Japanese, your Tokai Firebirds. Yeah. So you're not specifically talking about, the Gibsons or the Fenders. You'll take a lot of time to talk about, these left field guitars that perhaps people wouldn't have associated with being really, really good instruments. But you're quite firm that, these guitars are darn good, Bob.
So you're absolutely right. I mean, that particular Tokai Firebird, it belonged to a friend of mine. Unfortunately, he's deceased now. Lovely man called Rupert Webster, who was, a real face on the London blues scene for years. And he was a completely compulsive guitar and amplifier addict. He bought and sold the damn things all the time. I mean, just ridiculous. And we were playing together one day, rehearsing in a band, and he had this Firebird, and he said, "This is what I call the comedy Firebird." And he bought it for £200 from Chandler Guitars, which was a big dealer in Southwest London, great shop. And anyway, I had a play, and I said, "This is a great guitar. It's just a lovely guitar. £200? It's a joke, you know." And I probably had something hanging around my neck that was, I don't know, 5,000 quid or something like that.
Yeah.
And anyway, a bit later, he came across this rather storied Gibson 335. It had been refinished in a kind of metallic burgundy color, but it was from 1961, and it was a hell of a guitar. It had been messed around, but it was a hell of a guitar. And he was basically scraping money together to buy that, selling everything. So he sold me this Firebird, and I said, I'll pay you what you paid for it. Fair enough. And, you know, I probably play it most weeks still. It's a lovely guitar, but it's really pretty crappy. I mean, the body is made up of planks of wood that aren't, about 4 inches wide, planks of wood all cramped together. And they're not even straight with the neck. They're on an angle. It's pretty cheaply made, but, you know, you can, just like you can find some really, really valuable, expensive guitars that are just dead. And you can find some really low-priced guitars. I mentioned Tokais from the 70s earlier. Most of the session players in the 70s were retiring their Strats and picking up a Tokai breezy sound and putting some nice pickups in it.
Wow.
Another guitar. I mean, I'm not a bass player, but I do have a couple of basses. I went to a shop in London called the Bass Gallery, which is pretty good for that kind of shit. And I just said, look, guys, I need something like a Squire Precision or something, just so I can knock a bass part out at home when I'm recording.
Yeah.
And they said, well, try one of these. They gave me this guitar and I played it for a bit. I said, well, I'm no bass player, but it sounds really terrific to me. How much is it? It's £110, sir. And we'll throw in a soft case. Okay, what? I mean, that's less than I pay for a pickup. What? He said, it's £110. Well, okay, tell me about it. It's a brand called Revelation, made by the guys who used to do Hohner.
Oh.
Not Hofner, Hohner. So they've been operating in the guitar market for years, doing cheap guitars. These Revelation basses are unbelievable for the money. And I know lots of pros who've retired their salmon pink P bass from 62.
Wow.
Quite right. And they're going out with 110. Well, I was so impressed, I bought the fretless version. The pair of guitars cost me £230 altogether. And they sound unbelievable. Now, I think if you went out and played the Albert Hall, you'd want to take a really nice swanky guitar out. But the fact is, when my bass players come around here and play, I've got a little bass amp, I've got these Revelations, and if they can't be bothered to get their guitar on the train, they just turn up and play my guitar. They go, this is a fantastic bass. How little did you say it cost? So there are fantastic instruments out there for no money as well. And that hence, you know, you could get a really good telly or a Strat with a little bit of attention for £250 if you really kissed a lot of frogs and looked out carefully and found something. And then you'd have £2,000 left out of your budget to spend on a really great amplifier.
Again, so that's amazing that you're sharing that with us, because you know, it just offers again some more depth to the organic aspect that you are as a music fan and a guitar player. You know, you're not a snob. You know, the fact that you can afford some of these sought after guitars, well, that's fantastic. You know, and that's due to hard work.
Yeah.
And, you know, obviously a bit of good luck when that guy came over and showed you that 58, you know. So, but I've got a couple of other questions for you, Bob. So when you got into this idea that you were going to buy a Les Paul, did you have the contacts that you could trust beforehand? Is that something that you already how did you then get into this separate marketplace that's going on, you know, that we don't participate in?
Right. So viewers, that is a great question, and we have not discussed this before. Okay, but it's a great question because there's a good story here which might help you. So I'd obviously played guitar a long time. I'd been to loads of guitar shops, spent quite a lot of money in guitar shops. So I was kind of known a little bit, but I wasn't really connected in this space at all. I did have, so my Stratocaster was a 61 that I bought in 75 for very little money. So I kind of stumbled across the fact that I had a valuable vintage instrument rather than went out to buy it.
Okay.
So the Les Paul was really important to me because it was the first real proper vintage instrument that I bought. And I knew it was going to cost me a lot of money. So what I had to do was I had to go on a very steep learning experience. And so what I did is I approached a number of the people who I thought did this kind of thing. And my shtick was very simple. I've come to this market. This is what I want. And as I say, it was a 57, 58 gold top that I was looking for, really.
Sure.
This is what I want. I know I'm going to have to spend, in the money of that day, I'm going to have to spend about £15,000 on it. Okay. That would probably, give or take, buy me a good one. But I've got a real problem. I don't have very much experience in these things. So what I need is I need people to give me a crash course in these instruments, expose me to as many of these instruments, not just 57 Les Pauls, but old guitars, lots of them, so I can get a feel for the smell and the feel and all the rest of it. Most dealers, as in life, just went wanker. Even if I took the £15,000 out and waved it in front of their nose, because I'm not a great fan of guitar retailers or vintage dealers. There's a bunch of hoods and crooks there, right? Not a great fan. And basically, they couldn't see a direct and very short route between the church and the pub, or in my case, between my money and their pocket. So they just thought, he's a wanker. A couple of guys took me seriously and started exposing me very quickly to all kinds of things, 335s, 345s, a couple of 58 Carina Vs. You know, and like this, come in the shop after hours tonight. We've got a Carina V coming through. It's landed here for 75. It's going to leave tomorrow morning at 110. Come and play it, right? That kind of story happened.
Wow.
And so within a matter of weeks, I suddenly got the feel of the neck profile, this thing about these aren't covered in cling film, what to listen for, and all the rest of it. And lo and behold, one of those guys that indulged me was one of the guys who then turned up with the Sunburst and got his cut on my purchase. But I did that. And I would say to anybody, if you're out there and it's serious, this is a great deal of your money. It is your money. It is not their money. It's your money. Never forget that. So if they just want to give you the runaround and say, oh, you're a wanker, then don't give them your money. They don't deserve your money, right? The people who treat you properly, they're the people you should give your money to. And if they treat you properly, they'll find you a great instrument. It might be painfully expensive, but if it's great and you know what you're up for, then do it. But remember, until you decide to buy it, it's not, your money is not their money. However hard they try to make you feel inadequate, insecure, it's your money. Simple. And, you know, it worked for me. And now I do that routinely. I'm never shy of asking advice of all kinds of people. And you know what? When you ask people's advice, they give it to you.
Sure.
Some of it, there's real wisdom in there. Yeah. So, you know, be kind of directed because it's your money, but be humble. But that's what I did.
Wow. Fantastic. So that organic connecting again, you know, you got out there, you made those connections.
Yeah.
Built them.
And by the way, I should say, when you're buying, so obviously a lot of my instruments, I mean, that the Les Paul I bought in the UK, this is rather before the CITES thing, you know, these rules that make it difficult to move wood around the world, which is really screwing up the liquidity of the guitar market tremendously, because it is still quite hard to move instruments across state boundaries. But when I started buying guitars from the States, I mean, very often you're buying guitar completely sight unseen. You can't, if you're buying, you know, behind me, I've got a red and a blonde single pickup 330, which happen to be my favorite instruments in the world. I don't know why, but they just speak to me. But when I was buying those, you know, it's uneconomic to fly out to the States.
Sure.
To go and see a guitar of that value that you might not like. So you're basically buying sight unseen. My gold top Les Paul was lurking just the other side, that side. I bought that from Rumble Seat Music. I got them to play it acoustically down the phone to me. Because by then I knew what a Les Paul should sound like acoustically because I had my Sunburst. So I knew what I was buying. With one of the 330s, I bought it off Gary Dick of Gary's Classic Guitars. Highly reputable, very expensive, not really a chancer. Proper grown-up retailer.
Okay.
You know, expensive guitar. But, you know, I said, Gary, how is it? He said, you'll like this guitar, man. You'll like this guitar.
Wonderful.
Phone me up and tell me I'm wrong. Right behind me, dead center, 1959 335, amazing guitar. A friend of mine was going out to the West Coast, and he knew I was in the market for one. He went into Norman Harris's shop, looked at all Norm's unbelievable stock, then looked at all Norm's private stock out the back.
Okay.
Phoned me up and said, I found your guitar. It's perfect. It's very expensive, but it's perfect.
Wow.
So I phoned Norm Harris up a few hours later, talked to him about it. I said, don't suppose we can negotiate on the price at all, can we? And he gave me $500 off, which was a drop in a bucket. The only thing I can say was that was in the very week, the last time when the pound was $2.
Okay.
So the exchange rate helped me. It made a colossally expensive instrument into just a painful instrument.
Okay.
But it's such a perfect guitar. It's the only guitar in my collection that I'm afraid of. Because it looks at me and it goes, "Are you good enough?" And the truth is, I'm not. It's the snootiest guitar I've got, but it's perfect. It sounds and plays incredible.
Look, ladies and gentlemen, if you're not familiar with Bob's playing, like I say, I'll attach Ramon's channel and Bob's channel to the video here. You'll see Bob playing. So you know, Bob can play the guitar, ladies and gentlemen. So we just want to make that clear. But Bob, I've got another question for you, if that's okay. You did a wonderful video where you were talking about, you know, you were doing some archaeology on Les Pauls, what to look out for. I'm not sure which channel, whether it was on your one or Ramon's. You'll be able to correct me. And then you were talking about the theories of where Clapton's Beano Les Paul is, or where it might be, or where it could be. That, again, a fascinating video. Really, really interesting. Again, for ladies and gentlemen watching, I'll attach that video here for you to watch. Can you talk to us about that video and some of your thoughts on that, please, Bob?
Well, there's two angles to approach this from. I'll answer the question and then go off on a complete tangent, because I've also got first-hand experience of working with Clapton recently. So we can do a little bit on that too. But going back to the point, the guitar came to Ramon originally. The guitar, he was alerted to it. This guy, of very humble means indeed, living not far from me in North London, had this pretty duffed up tomato soup Les Paul. Yeah. And this guitar was corroborated by a guy called Gordon Hortin, who used to work in a famous shop in London called Top Gear in Denmark Street. And basically there was a bunch of music shops like Selma and Sound City and all that stuff up and down the main drag where all the music stores were. When I was growing up, there were two stores you wanted to go to. One was Orange, and they only had about 5 guitars in the back, but they were all TV or Cherry double cuts and Sunbursts. Wow. Only 5 guitars, but they were real guitars, expensive. And the other shop was Top Gear. And Top Gear, Orange was a tiny shop. You couldn't really even get in past all the Orange amplifiers. But Top Gear was bigger, and somebody in one of your favorite bands was always in there, passing by, trying out guitars, and just... So as a school kid, I just used to hang around in the shop every day until they kicked me out, and watching all these guys and watching their chops and picking up the tricks. And this Gordon Hortin guy was one of the sales assistants in the shop, and I got to know him quite well. And then he resurfaced years later when he was associated with this potentially lost Beano guitar. Sure. So the video A little bit of clickbait as well, because, you know, was it really going to be this long lost guitar? Really? Well, it was possible. I mean, my job was really to try and work out whether it was real, not whether it was the Beano guitar, whether it was just a real Les Paul. And it was a real Les Paul, but it had really seen better days. The finish had kind of gone matte, and it kind of looked like it had too much lipstick on. It was so bright. And one of the pickups was okay. One of the pickups was a 70s T-top pickup and bits and pieces of shit. So Ramon was getting very frothy on the video about, you know, it could be. And I was kind of going, it's a real Les Paul, but it's seen better days. But this particular guitar you're talking about, it's legendary because it was stolen from Clapton at the peak of his powers, you know, Beano time.
Sure.
You know, when he was making the most incredible sounds on an electric guitar anybody's ever made. Just that good.
Sure.
And you know, it was stolen. It's never been seen again. So I mean, truly, it's achieved completely mythical Holy Grail status. And you know, therefore, periodically, videos, including ours, surface as like, could this be it? One day, it's conceivable that it might surface, but I think it's less and less likely, because the trouble we've got now is that a lot of people are dying. Sad but true, but people are getting to a certain age, you know? I mean, we lost David Lindley 2 days ago or 3 days ago. You know, it's like I lost my dear friend Alan Darby 4 weeks ago, and so on. You know, it's we're all getting to a certain age. So that was that with the Beano guitar. Jumping into the other thing, some people who follow me, they'll know this already, so I won't labor it. But again, through Alan, Eric Clapton invited Alan Darby to go out and guest with him at his last Crossroads fundraiser show in Dallas in 2019. So just before COVID and pandemic and lockdown. And Alan demanded that I accompanied him and teched for him. He wasn't very well, so I was sort of part kind of general prop and sort of nurse, and part guitar technician and moral support. That was my role.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So we flew out. We were out there for about a week, but it meant that I got to spend significant quality time in rehearsal and socializing with Eric and his band, who were unbelievably good to me.
Wow.
I mean, because, you know, when Alan first said, I want you to go out and do this for me, I said, I've never, you know, apart from setting my gear up in a shitty pub, you know, I've never been on a big stage. I don't know how to behave. I don't know all the protocol of being in on crew, you know? And I said, in fact, I recommended my friend Cliff Brown, who makes 633 amplifiers, which are fabulous British amplifiers, boutique amps. I recommended him because I said, Alan, you need somebody who knows what they're doing. And Cliff knows what he's doing. Alan said, no, I want you. Okay, I'll go. So I went out there, and I made damn sure everybody on the crew was well aware that I was there at Alan's insistence, that I didn't really know what I was doing, but I was there to offer him every support and help I possibly could. And I just did everything that I thought I could possibly do with a minimum fuss, didn't make myself a nuisance, all the rest of it. And they were brilliant to me. All of them, the band as well as the tech crew. They were really brilliant to me. So I had an amazing week with lovely, lovely people, because that band is a tight family unit. They've been together a long time. They all know how to behave. You know, there's no transgressions, and they and their families travel properly. Nobody's grubbing it. They play beautifully, and they clearly all get on really, really well. And so I was basically part of that family for a few days. It was unbelievable. And part of that experience, I got to talk to, you know, the person who is the reason I play the damn thing, right? So at some length, and even talk some shit. He asked my opinion about a couple of them. I said, you don't want to know what I think. You're Eric Clapton. He said, no, I've heard you play guitar. It's all right. What do you think? Oh, okay.
So we're all Clapton fanboys here. Okay, so we've got to make a disclaimer here. I'm a Clapton fanboy. There's a lot of people in the chat here. Brody Hutchins, another Clapton fanboy. So, Greg Zeppelin's here, another Clapton. Please, Bob, talk through us. Talk about this experience, the conversations and what you shared with Clapton, if you don't
Okay.
mind.
Okay. Well,
Please.
the first thing is, I mean, anybody who's read or listened to anything about Eric knows that Eric he's quite private. He's had
Yes.
quite a lot of really bad shit in his life.
Yes.
I mean, addictions to alcohol, addictions to drugs. A baby boy, falling out of a high-rise window in New York. I mean, really bad news. The whole, his love story with Patty Boyd and all that shit. So he's had plenty of crap in his life. He's also been a star for a very long time. And when you're a star for a very long time, everybody wants to be your best friend. So you have to develop strategies to basically be standoffish and keep people away.
Okay.
So he is quite famous for being not only quite reclusive, but also occasionally really quite difficult, because that's how he keeps people away. There's this wall of difficulty around him.
Sure.
So I, in other words, what I'm doing really is I'm saying, so as far as I'm concerned, I completely excuse that behavior completely, because I know why. It is not malicious. It's intentional. It's a defense mechanism.
Sure.
But when I was inside the perimeter, his approach to me was unbelievably welcoming, warm, friendly. He wasn't all over me. He was busy. He was rehearsing a show in front of 20,000 people 2 nights hence and running a big fundraiser. He was busy, but he spent proper time with me, and he was an excellent conversation partner, quite charming. I feel very, very blessed to have met him.
Wow.
And we did talk some geeky shit, which was, talking geeky shit to the reason that I have done this for 50 years is kind of pretty good.
Oh well, I know that there's a lot of us that are envious, but also join in the celebration and the experiences that you've had by being behind the back scenes with Clapton, because he's my guy. Clapton's my guy, Bob.
By the way, his stage setup is an Eric Clapton Stratocaster with the horrible mid-boost control, a cable, a wah pedal, and one of 2 Dumble modified Fender. Are they Bandmasters?
Yeah,
I think they are. And he has 2 identical amps on stage. One is on, and the other one is sitting right next to it in case the tubes go fut. And that's it. The only other switch on stage is the switch that turns on his Leslie, that diverts some of the signal to his Leslie cabinet. That's it. It's hands, guitar, cable, combo amp. That's it.
Do you mind? Obviously Nathan East. We love Nathan East. His contribution to Clapton's band over the years. Going back to the 24 Nights, that wonderful DVD that's out there, video. Yeah. We've seen Nathan progress, and obviously Doyle. Being a key figure in Clapton's circle and also in his band. Going through, probably sharing similar experiences through some of the addictions that Doyle's had. So there's that connection there. Do you mind sharing some of your experiences with these 2 guys with us?
So where I was on stage is Alan's rig is directly adjacent to Nathan's. So my position was almost directly behind Nathan during rehearsals and at the gig. So I spent an even greater amount of time in very close proximity to him. Absolutely charming fella. Had all the time in the world for me. Charming fella, incredible singer, incredible musician, the most unassuming guy, modest, all the rest of it. Incredible guy, terrific. So that's Nathan. Steve Gadd was playing drums, so all my drummer friends just go, he's God. Okay, so Steve Gadd was playing drums. The next over was Doyle. Doyle's a very different character. Doyle's quite private. He's much more closed and slightly darker. And funnily enough, maybe I'm making up too much, but if you listen to the way he plays guitar, which is interesting because he plays upside down.
Yes.
So he's playing a right-handed guitar left-handed.
Correct.
his tech, Matthias, explained this to me, because I said, Matthias, you're right-handed. How can you work for a left-handed guitarist? He said, look at the strings. He's playing a right-handed guitar. So I can set the guitar up so it plays for me, and I just give it to him like that. And it's like, okay, good answer. And Doyle plays through quite a lot of effects, and he plays through a 2-rock amp. So Doyle, and he has quite a dark sound, and his bends are really interesting because they're from the wrong side of the neck. So you can hear him immediately. And Eric gives Doyle most of the solos now.
Yes.
I mean, when they play Badge, which is one of Eric's most iconic guitar solos to me, Eric plays rhythm. So, but Eric's probably played Badge so many thousand times, he really doesn't mind giving it away to a capable adult, So, Doyle's more Little Island unto himself. The other guy I spent lots of time with, of course, is the Hammond player, Paul Carrick.
Yes.
Wonderful voice. Had lunch with him, quite a long lunch with him, actually. It was really nice, Just all great people.
I've got another question for you, Bob. It became apparent in Clapton's biography, and there's a couple of articles since the biography where he talks about the significance of the Beano album, and he said himself, for a long, long time, I didn't understand it, didn't know it, didn't realise it. Never went back and saw what the fascination was with this album. It wasn't until later on in his life where he reflected on a lot of the stuff that he's done. That's probably part of the process of becoming sober as well too, I'm sure. Where he spoke about the significance of this album.
Yeah.
And what it meant, not only just for guitars and for guys like us, but just for music generally. So when you're hanging out with Clapton, does Clapton have any idea about how important he is as a person for guys like us and girls like us? We've got Holly in the chat for folks like us. Does he have any understanding of that, do you think?
Yeah, he absolutely does. And indeed, that's one of the many contributing reasons to why he has to have a kind of, a defensive mechanism around himself, because there are so many of us who, given the opportunity, would simply go, I want to talk to you about, and they all want to, basically we all want to talk about the same thing. We want to talk about Beano. And of course, the trouble is, for an artist like that, that's just one step in an illustrious and lengthy career.
Sure.
And, I've had a similar conversation with Robin Ford, who is the other guy. I think the Beano sound and the Talk to Your Daughter sound, for me, they define guitar, the kind of guitar tone I want to hear most out of an electric guitar. And I've had a conversation with him about that as well. But you have to be very, very, very careful and tentative about this, because you're basically, there are 1,000 ways of saying and one way of not saying that your best work is well behind you. That's what you're actually saying to them as an artist. Yeah. And that's threatening behavior. So if you want to get into this, you cannot go in through the front door.
Wow.
You have to go, you really have to go, be patient and go in round the back and very obliquely. And they still know what you're doing because they're not dumb.
No.
And it's really up to them as to whether they want to play with you or not. If they like you enough and you're being polite and solicitous enough, and it's fine. But if you go in and say, I thought your Beano album was great, then they'll go, thanks very much. Bye. As in life. I think if you and I had been that, talented and successful, I think we'd probably be exactly the same.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, of course.
They're both very aware, in their very different ways. But and other guys besides, obviously, your Jeff Becks, your Jimmy Pages. They're all extremely aware of how many grillions of people just adore the sound they made.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they get it. Surely, they get the power of music. We talk about it. This is why this channel exists,
Yeah,
Bob.
yeah,
Music has saved our life. It's been
yeah,
a big
yeah,
component of who we are as people. And while I don't play professionally, I've played in bands for a long, long time. I'm not playing in a band now. I just jam with a couple of guys. We do that weekly. We enjoy that. We get together, and we share that part of the musical journey. And
yeah,
then on Sunday night, we do the ranking of the tracks, and we get together with myself, the Rock Professor, and Brad, and we talk about great albums that were important albums in our lives, Bob,
yeah,
and share that part of the journey as well. And we approach what we do here on the channel. It's like a gig. You know what it's like. You go to a gig prepared. You got a bit of an idea, especially if you've got a gig coming up and you're practicing. You're making sure that these are the songs that you're going to do. This is what's going to happen, and you go to the gig and try and follow the blueprint. Um,
yeah.
let's just talk a little bit about you before we end the show. So you've been playing music for a long, long time, as well as developing a professional career.
Yeah.
So did you have dreams early on that of making music a career, or was it something that you knew that you were just going to have as a component of your life, and that you were going to follow another profession?
Okay.
Can you talk to us about that? And then where did music, playing in bands, how important was that in your
Yeah.
life?
Yeah. Okay.
Please.
So the beginning, so probably when I was late teenage, I did harbor some ideas about maybe doing this, doing it for a living.
Okay.
But that was rooted in the fact that I hadn't a clue what I was thinking or talking about. And so I did end up trying it for about 3 months, playing professionally, being in bands, recording and stuff. And I realized very quickly that I had no idea what I was thinking, that it wasn't for me, that I simply was not good enough, even in those days. Funnily enough, I mean, my playing has got better over the years. I could probably
Sure.
hold my head above water now, but back in that day, I wasn't good enough. I wasn't savvy enough. I was nothing enough. It's a stupid idea. The only thing that really kept me going was that I was pretty aimless at that point in my life. I mean, I was in higher education and not enjoying it, and I had no idea about what I might have to do to earn my living for the rest of my life.
Okay.
And that actually ended up being a series of benign accidents that led me into advertising and ended up being great fun and reasonably rewarding.
Sure.
So, yes, I veered towards it for all the wrong reasons and realized that I wasn't up to it anyway. So that was the professional bit.
Sure.
The rest of it is just, therefore, I've just been, an amateur.
Yeah.
And I've played in bands pretty much all my life with a cross section of people, some of whom have gone on to be quite successful and reasonably well known, many of whom have faded into obscurity. And I've been in originals bands, electric bands, acoustic bands, loads and loads of covers bands. I've got a strange relationship with covers bands. I've been in lots. I've been in some successful ones.
Okay.
One of them, actually, which I founded but have left, is, I'm not quite sure if they are actually playing the Glastonbury Festival this year or whether they're just messing around with everybody. But if they are, it'll be an incredible achievement. The thing about covers, I think you have to be in a covers band because it's so good for your chops.
Sure.
It's so good for your variety. You've got to be able to play a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of the other, and it'll introduce you to some weird chords and rhythms and stuff. It's really good for you. But after a while, you do realize that you are just a karaoke machine. So I find I've got really quite mixed feelings about being in covers bands. I'm quite glad that I don't do much in that space any longer. So I prefer to do two things: either live creation, in other words, jamming blues,
Sure.
or modern kind of indie. That's where I prefer to be now.
Brilliant. Amazing.
But having said that, the other thing is, I mean, anybody watching this show, I don't know if they're watching from other territories. I don't know if it's the same, but in the UK, there aren't many gigs. So the way I approach that to get to play at all is I'm in quite a few bands, each of which plays occasionally. And that's how you get gigs, along with a fair amount of open night work.
It's interesting that you should say that. There's a couple of things, Bob, that I want to pick up on from what you've just said. Don't let age, ladies and gentlemen, become a barrier for you wanting to play or pick up an instrument or the guitar. Please, I've had friends of mine over the last 10 years, well in their 40s, in their 50s, pick up the guitar, learn 3 or 4 chords, go to get a couple of lessons. Now they're playing really, really well. I myself, in the last 7 years, have learnt to play the banjo, clawhammer banjo, the mandolin, the slide resonator, and the harp. It's a myth if you think that you're 15 or 16 and then you get all this music power and then it just stops. You know, the young cats that do get this golden touch early on, well done, and thank you to the gods for doing that. But most of us, we actually do, believe it or not, get better as we get older.
Yeah. Especially we get better because it's as often what we don't play as what we do play. When we're young, we want to play everything. I still play far too many notes and far too fast. But then that's the way I speak as well. So in many ways, it's almost like, yeah, that's you. But I'm playing less notes and the notes are better as I get older.
Yeah.
So actually you could sit down and say my shred chops are probably now declining with age. But shred chops aren't really very important. I mean, some of these guys you see on YouTube these days, there are some guys mainly coming out of Eastern Europe and their guitar playing is utterly terrifying. The speed and the accuracy and the detail of the composition is extraordinary. And after 2 minutes, you're going, I'm bored.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just bored. I'm astonished.
Mm-hmm.
I'm overwhelmed. I'm astonished, but I'm already bored.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I can sit down and listen to the Beano album and want to put it on again after 35, 40 minutes. It's just different. I mean, the world is, there's a lot of different kind of musics out there now, including this uber impressive stuff. And certainly some of my younger friends, because, one thing I can do is I can mentor my younger friends and my friends' kids and stuff, give them access to brilliant gear, channel them in different directions, according to, maybe you're going to be more of a Gibson player, a Fender player, or an Ibanez player. Maybe you want an amplifier that's got a lot of gain or whatever, maybe you need a couple of stomp boxes. Help them out, give them first-hand experience of stuff before they have to spend their own hard-earned money on it and stuff like that. And I mean, the young guys, some of the young guys coming through, I've got a couple of, I wouldn't call them proteges, but I've helped them a lot. But suddenly there's this moment that happens, usually mid-teens, when if they're serious, they suddenly just go vertical.
Correct.
And they were a handy little guitarist when they came around last week, and suddenly it's like, God, what is that?
Yeah.
Wow. And they go vertical, usually for about a year, 18 months. And if they continue to go vertical, and they end up here, and they're frighteningly good. If they then go off and learn all the stuff that backfills the technique they've acquired, in other words, learning what they're doing and why they're doing it, then they become musicians.
Awesome. I just want to do a shout out. We've got Davey in the chat. Thank you, Davey. Good to see you. He was
Hi, Davey.
Posting some great comments when we were advertising the fact that we were getting you on the channel. He was really, really supportive. Thank you for jumping over, Davey. Love to get Davey on the channel. Love to get you. And we've also got Brad Cook, one of the co-hosts on the channel, all the way from Melbourne, Australia, here hanging out with us too. So good to see you, bro. I just want, you were talking about gigs and venues and the inability now to have these places to play that we had, for example, in the 80s or the 90s. That's the same situation here in my hometown. In the 80s and 90s, you could play anywhere, Bob, in my town. Live music for whatever the venue was always the number one thing.
Yeah.
You know, the DJ was just the person that played the music in between sets. So you were always guaranteed a place to play, Bob, whether it was a small little pool bar somewhere with 10 or 15 people or a workman's club. There was always a venue.
Yeah.
But what's interesting now is that if you look at my hometown, there's no live music anymore that you know, for a band to go and play. A friend of mine was saying this a couple of weeks ago, and I want to share this theory with you. In the 70s, for example, Tom Petty, as a good example, and the band that he had at the time, they would hire the venue themselves.
Yeah.
They would advertise the venue. They would sell the beer themselves because they had to provide the forum for them to play music, Bob.
Yeah.
Would you see something similar like that happening in the future for a blues band, you know, that's getting together and they want to go and play?
At the top level, of course, that is happening because Bonamassa, right, has total control over what he does. So if Bonamassa plays the Albert Hall, he books the Albert Hall for 2, 3, 4 nights, right? Sells tickets. Well, he takes all the financial risk, but enjoys all. He keeps it all in the system, right? So at the very top end, it's happening. But I think the first thing to understand is that in those days when there were lots of places to play, that's because there were lots of places to drink. The first thing that happened, and this is for some good reasons, because everyone was driving around, certainly in this country, they're all driving cars around completely shit-faced, right? Because they'd been out to the pub, country pub, drank too much, drove home, smashed themselves or somebody else up. So the idea of the unacceptability of drink driving cut in. That meant that the boozers that wanted to keep in business weren't in the business of selling drinks, they were in the business of selling food. Right. That was step number one. Step number two was they realized that you keep your best room for selling the food in, not for playing the music in. So, for example, the Bull's Head in southwest London, famous jazz room, really quite a serious gig to play back in the day.
Yeah.
Well, they realized they could make more money out of that by serving food in that room. So they bumped the music to the little room at the back, which used to be a cheap Thai restaurant. It's a great little room. We play there quite often. But music has been downgraded for food. That's the second step. The third step was the pandemic that shut everything.
Sure.
And many, many hostelries selling food or drink or doing music simply never recovered and closed. So you've got 3 steps over maybe 35 years that have really closed music down. And the fourth thing, of course, is, and again, you know, you and I are both fans of social media, but this is where it goes wrong, is that nobody likes a music pub next door to them. So every pub that's doing music, a pub near me that I play at, really quite a nice pub, quite a nice room, good sound, all the rest of it, they're currently fighting another neighbor petition to stop their music license.
Oh, gosh.
Right? And this is common. So all the forces are at play to stop us having some fun. And it does mean that gigs are harder and harder to come by. And in the meantime, all those poor proper musicians who earn a living from it, not like me, they were denied a living for 2 years through the pandemic. They're desperate to make a living and play. The competition between real musicians is intense. And then people like me come along, amateur gentlemen come along and basically fuck it up. You know, I'm very aware of my position in this. That I'm what the competition authorities would call a market distortion. But I love playing too, sorry, and I will play whenever I can. And
Sure.
yes, I will muddy your water, Mr. Professional Musician. I'm sorry about that. I will do that. And it's my right, just like it's your right to resent me. That's fine. But it's very competitive. It really is, you know. And the other thing is that the few venues that do it, I mean, talk about a buyer's market, you know, the joy of playing music is offset by the way you are treated by the venue.
Okay.
And it's not good. And if you want to be treated really badly, do a gig in a hotel where all the staff are treated pretty brutally. They're on minimum wage. They're treated badly by their management. The only people that they can treat worse are the band. And if you've ever played in a hotel, you know, and especially if you're used to a working life in business where, you know, you make something of yourself and you're treated with a bit of respect and all the
Sure.
rest of it. You go out and play in a band like that, you realize this is what the real world's about. Oh, everybody should do it because it's an eye opener.
Okay, so you know, on a Friday you go from doors being opened for you, and then on Saturday night doors have been slammed in front of you.
And by the way, before we slam the door on you, would you take the rubbish out? Absolutely, yeah.
We've had the rock professor Simon Williams in the chat too, so forgive me, Simon, for not doing a shout out to you. We're going to be back on the channel later on, ladies and gentlemen, with Rock Professor and Brad, and we're going to be ranking part 2 of At Fillmore East, the Allman Brothers' great live album, Bob. And yeah, we're looking forward to that. Bob, I'm mindful of the fact that you and I have been on for an hour and 41 minutes. I've had a blast. Bob, we didn't get to ask any of the questions that I had prepared for you. I'd love to get you back, Bob, for a part 2, maybe in 6 weeks' time. I know you're busy. I'd love to get you back and continue the conversation if you want.
It would be an honour.
Fantastic. We'll slot that in, ladies and gentlemen. I'd ask you, please, to go and support Bob on his channel. I'll include all the links to this video if you're watching on a replay. Tell Bob that the 5150 show sent you too, and share his videos on your social media links. Bob's got some really interesting stuff there, as well as Ramon's channel. We'll attach that too, because there's a lot of videos there that Bob has done with Ramon that you guys are going to find really interesting. And I'll do the best that I can to attach the videos that we've made reference to on this show, because like I say, the organic collective experience that Bob's picked up over the years that he's passing on to us is always appreciated. And we never expect it, Bob, but the fact that you've taken some time to touch us with that, thank you.
Well, you're welcome. I'll send you the link to my own channel as well, which is called Rock Bear Guitars, where there's some of my terrible playing, a few gear demos, things like that. So I'll send you that link as well to add to your.
Oh, please do. Because
it's a tiny channel. It's got about 60 or 70 subscribers. It's nothing, but
please do that, and we'll attach those 3 channels. Ramon's channel, the Bob and Ramon show.
You've got the guitar show, you've got Bob and Ramon, and Rock Bear Guitars. They're the 3.
Okay. Yeah. And we'll attach those. And
cool.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you're here live, come back in a couple of hours and I'll edit the videos if you want to go over there and support Bob. Please do. Please support him. He deserves it. Let's do what we do here on this channel. We support each other and we help each other, and just take the time to hit that subscribe button. If you have any questions for Bob for part 2, if you've got any questions, attach them to this video, or message Bob if you're friends with him on social media, on Facebook, or message me, and we'll get together. We'll compile some questions, and we'll hang out for another hour and a half, 2 hours in a few more weeks. Bob, I'm going to give you the last word. Thank you again for taking time out of your life and just entertaining us with some great stories and your experiences. Means a lot to me. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thanks to everybody who tuned in and listened. I'm really flattered. I'm really flattered. I've had a great time. Had such fun. Real blast. Very happy if you think it's got legs to do it again. At a respectable interval. Love to do that too. And, happy to pick up and, handle any kind of, interface and questions if there is any. Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. I'm not going to do a shout out to you guys. You guys all know who you are in the chat. We never expect you guys here to support us, but we're always humbled by the support you guys give us. You mean a lot to us. Go and show some support to Bob. We'll see you in a couple of hours. Where's this video? There it is.